Psychological invalidation is one of the most lethal forms of emotional abuse. It kills confidence, creativity, and individuality. What is emotional and psychological trauma? Emotional and psychological trauma is the result of extraordinarily stressful events that shatter your sense of security, making you feel helpless in a dangerous world. Emotional and psychological trauma can be caused by commonly overlooked causes, such as humiliating or deeply disappointing experiences. While traumatic events can happen to anyone, you're more likely to be traumatized by an event if you're already under a heavy stress load, have recently suffered a series of losses, or have been traumatized before, especially if the earlier trauma occurred in childhood. Childhood trauma can result from anything that disrupts a child's sense of safety. We all react to trauma in different ways, experiencing a wide range of physical and emotional reactions. There is no right or wrong way to think, feel, or respond, so don't judge your own reactions or those of other people. Your responses are normal reactions to abnormal events. Emotional and psychological symptoms: shock or disbelief, confusion, anger, irritability, mood swings, feeling sad or hopeless. If your psychological trauma symptoms don't ease up, or if they become even worse, and you find that you're unable to move on from the event for a prolonged period of time, you may be experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. While emotional trauma is a normal response to a disturbing event, it becomes PTSD when your nervous system gets stuck and you remain in psychological shock, unable to make sense of what happened or process your emotions. Trauma, stigma, and autism, chronic shame. Gordon Gates quote, "Stigma is a form of trauma. It targets people on the basis of beliefs about them that have nothing to do with who they are. It undermines a person's humanity and overshadows the fullness of their identity by placing assumptions about negatively perceived qualities over openness to their actual personhood." Although trauma is often framed in terms of a terrorizing event, it is the perceived physical and/or psychological threat to our personhood and residual self-protection that underlies much of the suffering involved. Having our humanity threatened, undermined, and devalued is fundamentally traumatic. It can shift us into a hyper-aroused state of defensive safety-seeking or guarded withdrawal and self-isolation. Chronic invalidation can lead to an oversensitive danger alarm in the body-mind waiting to be activated by the smallest trigger. We have much to learn from autism in this regard because the humanly erosive process of chronic invalidation is constantly at work through stigma and stigmatizing micro-events that can make us feel like crawling under a rock. Autistic individuals often experience the chronic assault of invalidation trauma in the form of stigma, as do many others who don't fit dominant expectations of what people are supposed to be like. This became trauma in the fiber of his being. It manifested itself in the form of dissociation, an inability to be present in the moment when stigma became activated, hypervigilance to rejection, and high levels of psychological arousal triggered by perceived deficits of acceptance. It was feelings of isolation and abandonment during his long recovery. The quality of an individual's life can be significantly impacted by accumulated feelings of perceived exclusion, abandonment, and disrespect. When we experience repeated stigma, judgment, rejection, and/or prejudice because of qualities inherent to our personhood, qualities we may not be able to change or may not have chosen, we may end up experiencing identity fatigue, a form of complex trauma involving chronic assaults on the fullness of our humanity.
Shame and trauma, and why they are so deeply connected. Let's begin by defining the two terms. Now, shame is defined as a painful feeling of humiliation or distress. Now, shame, on the other hand, is when we view ourselves as being bad or wrong. It's much deeper than guilt, and it can't be fixed by simply making amends or, following through with what you said you would do. As you can see, guilt can in some ways motivate us to be better and to make amends. Shame isn't motivating, and in most cases it can actually be debilitating. It can cause us to believe terrible things about ourselves and our situation, and in turn make our mental health issues even worse. Many of my patients and viewers have shared how shame has made them act in more self-destructive ways, whether it be sabotaging relationships or engaging in self-injurious behavior. Doing research, I've heard shame described as a developmental trauma, meaning that it doesn't occur immediately following the traumatic event, but it grows over time. It develops over time, especially if the traumas repeat or if our PTSD symptoms go untreated.
Shame, like trauma, puts the body in a freeze state. Lowers the ability to think and act clearly. Shame feels like a fog or cover, something that is external, that makes it hard to function. I think of shame as developmental trauma. Shame disrupts normal functioning and creates feelings of isolation and powerlessness. Invalidation is denying or ignoring a person's emotional experience and communicating that their thoughts or feelings are not valid or wrong. Invalidation hurts the most when you feel like people are not listening to you, misunderstanding or minimizing what you are saying, or you feel that you are being ignored. Invalidation, when used as manipulation by others, can be abusive and lead to damaging effects such as low self-esteem, depression, reliance on others, anxiety, and self-harm. When a person is told that their ideas, desires, and thoughts are wrong, stupid, or not worth considering, that person can feel invalidated. They can feel unheard and discounted. When a person finds that all their thoughts are always judged to be silly or not worth consideration, they can be said to be experiencing chronic or long-term invalidation. Invalidation and narcissism go hand in hand. Ever get the feeling you're invisible? Like you are entirely worthless and just don't matter? If yes, you know all too well the obliteration that inevitably comes from narcissistic invalidation. The effects are horrendously damaging and disempowering. Invalidation is used to slowly erase you. After all, when you've been emptied of your identity, full compliance to the narcissist's demands is almost guaranteed. There's little left to fight with. Defining validation. As human beings, we have basic needs: to be loved and to belong. These social needs are just as essential of other survival needs like food, shelter, and safety. Connection to others and being accepted is at the core of belonging, and being validated by others is an integral part of having these needs met. So, what is validation? It is being present and supportive of another person's experience by acknowledging their thoughts and feelings without attempting to change them. In being validated, we feel accepted by others, and we also accept ourselves. We feel heard, seen, and understood. In short, we feel valued. When toxic shame hangs around long enough, it gets embedded, not only in your mind, but in your body, in your defeated posture, in the way you move, the way you talk, and the way you relate to others. Toxic shame can sabotage your best efforts and undermine every good experience that you have. Sometimes toxic shame develops from later life traumatic experiences, such as living in a dysfunctional or abusive relationship, work incidents in which we are humiliated, repeated rejection from other people and organizations, betrayal, and so forth. A person suffering from toxic shame will experience a chronic sense of worthlessness, low self-esteem, and self-loathing, all connected to the belief that they are innately shameful or bad. Toxic shame is the internalized and buried shame that rots within. Brené Brown, daring greatly. Quote, "Shame is real pain. The importance of social acceptance and connection is reinforced by our brain chemistry, and the pain results from social rejection, and disconnection is real pain. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So, when I define shame as an intensely painful experience, I am not kidding. Neuroscience advances confirm that we've known all along. Emotions can hurt and cause pain. If we want to be fully engaged, to be connected, we have to be vulnerable. In order to be vulnerable, we need to develop resilience to shame. Shame resilience is the ability to say, "This hurts. This is disappointing and devastating, and I will not accept it." Invalidation is about dismissing your experiences, thoughts, and above all your emotions. Indeed, the intention is to not even allow you to have those thoughts, experiences, and emotions. It's a way of invading your head and reprogramming it. It's psychological abuse, messing with your thoughts, and emotional abuse, messing with your feelings.